Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing really great, and I'm so glad you've joined me for another fabulous story. Well, this is part 2 of our story, so if you haven't heard part 1, click on the description because you don't want to miss out on a fabulous story like this. And let's get started with part 2 of our story. When I returned to the kitchen after attending to my hair and teeth, the very first question I asked my Aunt Teresa is, "Where is Mummy, Aunt Teresa? Where is she?" My Aunt Teresa grimaced. She held her tongue for a moment, so my unanswered question hung in the air like a bad smell that everyone wilfully ignored. My father straightened his woven blue and white striped tie and glanced briefly at his watch. Oh dear, is that the time? I better be making tracks. I'm running awfully late. I should have left the house over an hour and a half ago. Look at me. I really am dawdling this morning. He kissed me on the cheeks, and his warm breath tickled my ears. He whispered to me, "Princess, you're not going to school today. Aunt Teresa is going to take you shopping in town for a bit of spoiling, to buy you some pretty dresses. Now, won't that be nice? She'll tell the teachers you're sick so that you can have a fun day together, doing girly things, just the two of you." "But it's not my birthday, Daddy." "Who says you need a birthday to have a special day?" my father had whispered to me. "My little princess needs spoiling from time to time, does she not? Daddy likes to spoil his beautiful princess." Before I could ask my father any awkward questions about the whereabouts of my mother, he had escaped through the back kitchen door with his leather briefcase in his hand, giving my aunt a wink, and leaving behind in the kitchen the lingering scent of his Old Spice aftershave. I could hear him reversing in the driveway, the heavy rubber tires of his truck whipping up the gravel unmercifully as he sped away. "But where is Mummy?" I asked again, feeling annoyed that no one was answering my questions, which was becoming like the elephant in the room that no one was addressing. "We will talk all about your mother after you've finished eating your pancakes, sweetheart." I didn't hesitate to get stuck into layers of blueberry pancakes, oozing with rich maple syrup and creamy ice cream. And the sugary sweetness meant that the absence of my mother did not seem quite so bitter. Sugar has the remarkable capacity to soothe our deepest hurts and to make things not seem quite so bad. And after I'd eaten my fill and was fully satisfied, Aunt Teresa held my hand in hers and said, "Well, sweetheart, there is something I need to tell you. Your Mummy and Daddy had a bit of a bad fight last night. Nothing too terrible, of course, but your Mummy was not very happy, so she's gone away for a while. She's left town. She told us to tell you that she loves you so very much. I've moved in with your father for the moment to help look after you. The two of us are going to have so much fun together while your mother is away. And we're going to have great fun today, aren't we?" "But when is she coming back? I want my Mummy." "Sweetheart, I'm not sure whether she will even come back. But it doesn't mean she's abandoned you or that she doesn't love you. Sometimes mummies and daddies have bad fights and they say mean things to each other. When that happens, sometimes the mummy or daddy move away. I'm sure you know kids in your own class at school that have divorced parents. It's quite common these days, you know." "Yes, but they still get to see their mummy and daddy all the time. I know Bobby Bennett. He's got divorced parents and he sees his daddy every single weekend. Why can't I see Mummy every weekend?" "Because you can, sweetheart, that's why. Well, not at the moment anyway. Your mother's too far away to be able to come and visit you regularly." I soon learnt to accept that any awkward question I directed to my father or my Aunt Teresa about the whereabouts of my mother were met with a curt response. "Give your mother time. I'm sure she will be in touch in due course," I was told again and again. "She's taking a while to adjust to her new life." I hasten to say no one asked after my mother in town, But that was because nobody really knew her. If any were asking after her, they possibly assumed she'd moved away, and that my father was now taking care of me. As my mother did not have any family to speak of, there was no one asking us any awkward questions about her whereabouts. It was almost as if she'd never existed. 1 week later, when the bus stopped at my usual location, I was once again dreading my long walk across that secluded, sequestered, lonely stretch of road, made worse by the fact that the fickle grey sky was beginning to spit out raindrops at random, as if it hadn't quite yet decided whether it would rain or not. "You're going to be all right, miss?" the bus driver asked me. "It looks like it's about to start spilling down buckets. I can drop you off outside your house if you prefer." "Thank you, Mr. Curtis. I'll be all right," I told him. "If you're sure," he said. "I'm sure, but thank you all the same." I climbed hesitantly down the steps of the bus, feeling panic wrap its claws around me like a hostile overcoat, interwoven with jagged thorns that made me prickle all over. The bus billowed away in a cloud of dust and smoke, and there I was, once again, feeling awfully alone, on this friendless, isolated stretch of barren road, left to the mercy of any loitering predator hiding within my mist. My imagination was rife with speculation, teeming with a plethora of unearthly cryptic suggestions, all about the monster hiding in there, behind those trees, burying itself in the foliage, watching me, waiting for me. I had foolishly not brought my raincoat along with me, so I could only cross my fingers and toes and hope with all my heart that the grim, uncongenial clouds would retain their water for just long enough for me to make it back home in time before it bucketed down without apology, so I did not return home looking like a bedraggled, drowned cat. The road looked ominously foreboding, as the pugnacious sky had grown ashen and hostile-looking, as if the dark, thunderous clouds were frowning down on me. The feisty wind began to whistle through the trees, whipping up boughs so they swayed, swished and rattled precariously, like an old creaking rocking chair. The tall, lofty trees on either side of the road jiggled their boughs, their leafy foliage rustling like hundreds of cheerleaders waving their pom-poms. It felt airily spooky on this bleak, miserable day, as if the evening was already peeping over the horizon and was eagerly, belligerently guzzling up the remainder of the daylight, with no empathetic consideration whatsoever for little people like myself, who are naturally terrified of the dark, and would like to navigate their way back home safely. It was bad enough to trudge along in the late afternoon like this, on a lonely, forsaken, abandoned piece of road that I loathed so very much, for it symbolized to me everything that is wrong with this world. It was a harbinger of doom for me. The forests that framed the road from either side stretched back for miles and miles, with sprawling depths where dark, sinister secrets remain hidden. Of that I was most sure. The bodeful sky had become infinitely more murky, as my immediate environment took on a menacing ambience that was so disquieting. It made every single hair on the back of my neck stand up on end. There were no birds trilling in the trees, for the bird song had all but dwindled away into nothing. Only the wind moaned and howled in an airy, disembodied voice. My internal alarm sounded its bells as every sensitive cell of my body, that was so perfectly in tune with my environment, could perceive danger as instinctively as a snake, for I could almost taste it in the air. I knew something was out there in the woods. I could feel the powerful, foreboding presence, sense the eyes burrowing into the back of my neck, hear the familiar crunching of leaves as heavy feet pressed them to a pulp like a pestle in a mortar, pulverizing herbs. Something was walking in the woodgrove, keeping a perfect, measured, coordinated pace in alignment with my movements. But this time the owner of this booming pair of feet was far too close for comfort, moving closer and closer towards me, hemming me in from every side. It felt like the predatory monoecious monster was all but a hair's breadth away from me. My ankles twisted across the uneven, craggy ground, while raindrops began to dapple my face like icy fingers. I glanced briefly towards the woodgrove to see if I could see the monster at all, but nothing was there. But even though I did not see anything, my mind was screaming, "Run! Run, Ruth! Run!" As I began to pick up speed, a couple of pine cones tapped me on my shoulders gently, with an accurate precision, as if someone who was a perfect shot had hit me square in the back with the bullets from a hunter's rifle. The pine cones fell from my back to the ground, landing at my feet. My blood grew cold, like an iceberg, as I stared down in bemusement at the pine cones, knowing that something had targeted my back with the efficiency of hitting the bullseye in a dartboard. Was this the day that my time had run out, the day that the monster was going to grab me and drag me into the woods kicking and screaming? The monster that had been watching and waiting for me all this time, and now he wanted me to know he was there. Now he was making his presence very, very clear. Once again, I stood very still, scrutinizing the woodgrove to see if I could see who he was or where he was, who had flung a couple of pine cones at me. But the woodgrove was just so quiet, too quiet, but nothing was there. I closed my eyes, shutting my lids as tightly as I possibly could. I counted to 10, and I hightailed it as fast as I could towards my home. And then I heard the monster running behind me. He was giving me chase, and his speedy movements made my clumsy attempts to run seem almost lethargically snail-like. I tried desperately to increase my speed. I really did. I couldn't turn round. I couldn't. I was now terribly afraid of what I would see, for whatever was running behind me was of a Herculean size. He was titanic in weight and strength and might. I could hear his high-octane feet pounding the ground, which vibrated and heaved under his great weight. The deep breaths he was taking as he gulped the oxygen in the air made me all too aware of how gargantuan he obviously was. "Run! Run!" my body screamed, as my frantic legs seemed to feel like blocks of cement beneath me, and seemed as useless as 2 lumps of jello. But I was not willing to give up, not yet anyway. My life hung in the balance. Whatever was behind me was gaining ground fast. At one point I could feel the vaporous warm breath on the back of my neck that smelt strangely of dillweed and spring onions. The thing was getting too close for comfort. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out of my throat. And then the most terrible thing happened. I suddenly tripped over my shoelace and went plunging to the ground, my knees slamming into some hard little pebbles. The pain shot through my body, and blood began to trickle down my grazed knees. Every part of my body throbbed and ached. I looked up in horror to see a giant creature covered in long black flowing hair, reaching out to me with an overlong arm and a large hand to help lift me off the ground. I tried to scream. This mighty, imposing beast was so large. This was the moment I had dreaded all my life. Now the intimidating, commanding monster was standing over me. My life had come to an end. I was certain of it. I knew it with every fibre of my being. As the creature pulled me up by my arms onto my feet and stared down at me from a great height, I noticed his brow was furrowing as he studied me through his treacle-coloured eyes. And it was then that I realised that this humanoid hairy man was not a monster after all. His eyes were like warm pools of melted chocolate, filled with genuine warmth and kindness. It was when he spoke to me, in a booming baritone voice, in a strange indigenous language that for some bizarre reason I seemed to understand. that my heart began to slow down its boisterous beats, and the hairs in my neck began to settle down happily like a tabby cat beside a warm fire. I felt comforted and soothed by this creature's presence, as if his energy had wiped away all my nagging fears and doubts, and put them to sleep, to awaken no more. I was 10 at the time, and comprehending the meaning of his words was not at all enigmatic to me. It was almost like I expected to be able to understand him, like the talking animals and the lion, the witch and the wardrobe. So let's just say an idiosyncratic experience like this felt completely normal and not particularly strange. It felt natural, as if he was speaking to me directly in English. "Ha ki la kina kwa, ho saki shakanasa, ha gi laki poko lanikasi, hitila kwashikasa, ho manifaka." "Why are you afraid, little one? I have been looking after you all your life, since you were a wee one. I have always made sure you returned home safe from school. It is me that has kept a silent watch over you for many years." He then handed me a little leather necklace with a strange amulet on it that looked a lot like a wishbone, along with an eagle's feather. "Milatika, it's for you," he said. "Itila kokasikakwa. It's to comfort you during your grief at this sad time. Kilonakisa, for you need your strength." "This necklace, it's for me. It's so lovely. It's really pretty." The hairy man seemed pleased with my enthusiastic response to his gift. "Tilatikwa ilakisakwasha. It'll keep you strong and your mind focused on each day." He tapped me gently on my back and walked with me until finally we reached the driveway of my home. He waited for me stoically at the end of the driveway as I stepped up onto the porch and then went through the front door of my home. And once I was inside the house, he nodded and glided away. And seconds later, the sky boomed with the drum rolls of thunder. Lightning thrashed warningly across the sky. And then the clouds relinquished their watery load, and the rain came down in torrents. Aunt Teresa grabbed me in her arms in a big bear hug. "Oh, thank God you're back! I was so worried about you. I was about to drive up to the bus stop to get you. It looks like the rain is here to stay, and that's quite some storm out there. It's not for the faint-hearted, let me assure you." She wasn't wrong about that. The storm did not abate until the following morning, and Martha our cat hid in the linen basket, crawling under the dirty linen, for she was very much afraid of the lightning and thunder. From thenceforth I knew I never needed to be afraid again, because all the time I'd believed there was a monster in the woods. There had been a big black hairy man watching over me, making absolutely sure I was safe. I knew my trip from the school bus, along with the lonely, forsaken stretch of remote road, would no longer serve to intimidate me. I soon settled down to life with my father and Aunt Teresa. She was a good woman, and took good care of me, and adored my father to boot. I think she thought the sun shone out of his backside, and she'd often say she wished she was not my father's sister, as she would have married my father in a heartbeat if she was not. I think my father secretly felt exactly the same way about his sister. "It's because we're cut from the same cloth, Teresa," he would say. "We get each other, but our relationship is better than that of a husband and a wife. I can assure you, we are the very best of friends, and nothing could ever tear our bond apart." And I hasten to say, it never did. My father and Aunt Teresa were as thick as thieves, and practically finished each other's sentences. For a brother and sister, theirs was an extraordinary, enviable relationship. In truth, my aunt would have climbed Mount Everest and balanced on a skyscraper for my dad if she needed to do so. She'd have done anything for him, including taking a bullet on his behalf. Hers was a sacrificial, unselfish, very protective love. Let's just say the kids in my class at school thought my lucky wishbone amulet with the eagle's feather was incredibly cool. Some of the boys in my class literally begged me to give it to them, offering me marbles, sweeties, and even money in exchange for my necklace. They were convinced it came from an Indian warrior or chief. I refused to part with my treasured necklace and wore it religiously under my school uniform every single day, far from the probing, interfering eyes of my teacher, Miss Mundell. I knew if Miss Mundell saw my necklace, she would unlikely be impressed. So I kept it hidden under my school uniform, refusing to take it off, except when I was bathing or swimming. My aunt, when she saw my necklace, was quite revulsed by it. "Oh, my goodness, sweetheart! What on earth are you wearing around your neck? You're not an Indian warrior, are you, dear? You're a little princess. You should be wearing pretty necklaces, shouldn't you? Where did you get that ghastly thing from?" "The hairy man in the woods gave it to me." "Now, sweetheart, I thought me and your father have taught you never ever to accept gifts or sweeties from strangers, especially strange men you don't know. And it's very rude to call anyone hairy. I thought I taught you that much. Some men cannot help the amount of body hair they have. I know my father's father, for example. He had a back that was so hairy, and he almost looked from the back just like a gorilla. But I was never rude about it to him. There are some things you don't say to people, because it can cause great offence." "But I wasn't rude to him. I never mentioned he was hairy. I just thought it to myself, but I never said it out loud." "Well, that's good, sweetheart. I suppose that's a start. I'm very glad you've learnt to be polite. But as nice as the hairy man may be, I think you shouldn't accept gifts from strangers, even if you claim to know them well. I mean, the thing is, this is hideous, darling. Would you not like me to buy you a pretty necklace instead? We can dispose of this thing in the trash. Pretty little princesses like you should not be wearing feathers around your neck or strange little amulets." "But I like it," I said possessively. "The kids at school think it's so cool. They even want to buy it from me." "Oh, honestly, do they really?" said my aunt, looking highly sceptical. "I can't honestly think why. Still, if you're dead set on wearing the thing, who am I to stop you? I'm sure when you get older and become interested in boys, you will not be seen dead wearing that atrocious thing." "But why, Aunt Teresa? All the boys love my necklace at school, and they're really jealous and envious of it." "That's because it's masculine, dear, isn't it? It's what an Indian warrior would wear, not a pretty little girl like yourself. The boys like it because they want to wear it. It makes them feel, what's the word? Laddish, red-blooded, strapping, brawny. Not because they think it looks pretty on you." Every day when I got off the school bus, I would look out for the hairy man with a hopeful ebullient smile on my face. I knew he was out there in the woods, and I wanted to see him again. I'd hear him and sense him, and from time to time a couple of pine cones would go flying gently into my back and land at my feet. And smiling, I would gather them up in my hands and put them into my backpack and take them home to add to my collection. On one very pleasant afternoon, after I'd returned home from school and was happily eating a turkey and cranberry sandwich on brown bread in the kitchen, made for me by my Aunt Teresa, I heard a car rolling over the gravel of our driveway. I was surprised, as was Aunt Teresa, as we weren't used to receiving visitors of any kind at our home, apart from the postman, Mr. Sweeney, whom my aunt occasionally invited into our kitchen, so he could fill her in about the gossip in town. My aunt pretended not to be nosy. She liked to keep herself to herself. That's what she liked people to think anyway. But while she remained seemingly aloof to the outside world, in truth she wanted to know the ins and outs of everybody's business in town. So even though she pretended to be indifferent and blasé, she was anything but. She cunningly plied Mr. Sweeney, who had a very sweet tooth, with all kinds of sickly sweet cakes and cookies, so he'd spill his guts out to her about the goings-on in town, and my aunt would lap it all up like a thirsty cat. Mr. Sweeney, although a postman, had a wagging tongue on him that loved to chatter, and my aunt took full advantage of his gossip, all the while artfully feigning a nonchalant disinterest. But if she fooled the locals in town, she never succeeded in fooling me. She would look at me after the postman had left, rubbing her hands gleefully together. "Did you hear that?" my Aunt Teresa would say. "The rumours around town are that 16-year-old girl, Tasha Wixley, is pregnant. Mr. Sweeney saw the young couple rolling around in the hay a few months back, and now she's got an extended stomach. Well, it's not difficult, is it, to do the math and to figure out what's going on there? You mark my words, the girl is pregnant." 16, would you believe it? That would never happen to you in our household. Those parents obviously don't keep a tight rein on their children. In my day, this kind of behaviour would have been absolutely scandalous, but not anymore. Things are so acceptable these days, when back in my time, no, this would not have been acceptable at all, she said, shaking her head wistfully. In between delicious mouthfuls of turkey and bread, I glanced out of our kitchen window to see two nuns of the Order of the Poor Clares climbing out of a clapped-out, rather rusty red Buick Riviera. Both were wearing a dark tunic, belt, scapular and veil. The Reverend Mother and Sister both proceeded to amble over to our front door. The Reverend Mother, a pleasant-looking woman in her late 60s, had a distinctive hobble to her step, almost as if she was limping. I later observed, on closer inspection, one heel of her shoes was higher than the other, so I think she had one leg longer than the other. My aunt groaned and muttered under her breath as she glanced out of the kitchen window. "I need this like a hole in my head," she said, but she went to the front door with me at her side and ushered our visitors into the house. I had never ever seen a nun before, close up and personal, so I stared at them both with a keen, very curious interest. "Hello," said the Reverend Mother, looking directly from my Aunt Teresa to me. "Hello, I'm looking for Phoebe Stewart. Is she by any chance in? We're old friends of hers, popping around for a visit." "Oh," said my aunt, "I'm Teresa Stewart, Phoebe's sister-in-law, to be precise. I've heard all about you from Phoebe. She talks so warmly about the nuns at the convent who raised her. She rarely misses Sister Alice, I believe. It was so tragic that the sister died. Such a lovely lady she was." "Well, our Alice had a very good innings," said the Reverend Mother. "One cannot complain about that. The good Lord was very gracious and kind to our Alice. She died at the convent at 95 years old, and was still dutifully tending to the vegetable patch on the very day she died. So let's just say she was one of the lucky ones. When the Lord takes my spirit, I hope it will be in a similar way." "Please come this way," said my aunt, guiding them into the kitchen, and insisting the nuns take a seat on one of the comfortable upholstered chairs at the oakwood table. The nuns had kind, benevolent faces. Wisps of grey hair peeked out from behind their veils. They possessed fair complexions, and both wore light-weight metal-framed glasses that framed pale cornflower blue eyes. My aunt bustled around our dark green range oven, busily making tea for the two nuns, and then finally sat down opposite them, with me seated by her side. My aunt gave both the nuns a watery, insincere smile that I noticed did not meet her eyes. Her well-manicured fingers began to tremble as she poured tea from a delicate periwinkle china teapot into 3 delicate china teacups. She presented those to the nuns. For a moment she shook so violently I thought the teacup was going to become airborne, and the contents of the hot tea go flying everywhere, possibly spilling all over the Reverend Mother's meticulous tunic. Why was my aunt shaking like a leaf? The Reverend Mother was very composed. She took the cup from my Aunt Teresa, flashing her a warm, reassuring smile. It was the first time I'd seen Aunt Teresa nervous, as rude beads of sweat had broken out on her forehead, which she wiped away apologetically with a tea-cloth. Oh dear, look at me. It's this kitchen, she apologized to the nuns. It makes me sweat like a pig. How might I help you, Reverend Mother and Sister Agnes? Might I say it is quite a pleasure to have you here, having learnt all about you from Phoebe, she said obsequiously, playing with her pearls nervously on her neck, jiggling the beads in her hands, which gave her fiddling fingers something to do, and seemed to help anchor her to the chair. I'm just concerned, that's all, about the whereabouts of your sister-in-law, Phoebe Stewart. She's been writing to us for years at the convent. We grew very fond of her when she arrived there. She was like a daughter to us. She always wrote to Sister Alice and to the rest of us at the convent. I know she took it really bad when Sister Alice died, but she did write to us regularly, and then she just suddenly stopped writing at all. We just wanted to check up on her, to see how she's doing. She said she was lonely in her life and that her husband Walker was not keen on her making new friends in town. She wanted us to pray for her about that contentious issue that gave her a great deal of grief. But we haven't heard from her for months. It's not like her not to write. I hasten to say it has left us feeling distinctly uneasy. Hence our fortuitous visit. We wanted to make sure all is well with her. Oh, I see. Well, you don't need to worry about Phoebe, said my Aunt Teresa, giving a stifled laugh and waving her hand in the air dismissively. She's married to my brother Walker, as you know, but they parted company for a while. She went away from here. An emotional mess she was in, actually. She claimed she needed some space. I guess after being raised in a convent, she, appreciates a little solitude from time to time, which is perfectly understandable in the circumstances. Fair enough, but why would she leave Ruth behind? Asked the Reverend Mother. Surely she'd take Ruth with her. Oh, absolutely not. No, she wouldn't want to disrupt Ruth from her school. After all, she's only gone away temporarily. She'll be back soon. You know how it is. My brother and Phoebe sometimes didn't agree on everything. I think Phoebe was distraught. She didn't handle the discord very well. She needed a break from all of that for a while. But she will be back very soon, once she's got her life together, sorted out her personal issues. We haven't heard a dicky bird from her since she's been away, but she's probably having such a fabulous time and is doing absolutely fine. And who knows, I think when she gets back, she and Walker will patch things up very nicely. I'm quite sure of it. Everything is up in the air at the moment, of course, but things will soon settle down, as they always do. Both the nuns looked at each other pensively. The Reverend Mother raised a sceptical brow. That's peculiar behaviour for Phoebe. She always had her feet firmly on the ground, I thought. It seems strange for her to leave Ruth here with you. You should have seen the effusive letters she used to write us about her daughter. There were so many of them. We believe it was our prayers that blessed her barren womb. So Ruth, I know, is Phoebe's greatest accomplishment. Even if she wanted to break from her life, I can't imagine her not taking her daughter along with her for the ride. Of course that may seem true, said my aunt gingerly. You weren't here to see how stressed Phoebe was at the time. Things just got on top of her. And you know how unhinging emotions can be, my aunt said gingerly. Every parent is thankful from time to time for a break from their child. And Phoebe was no exception to this. She was glad to get away from Ruth for a while. She needed that break. It was important to her. The Mother Superior looked at me warmly. You must miss your mum. She loves you a lot, you know. Wrote so many letters about you over the years to us. When is she coming back? I asked, looking at the nuns as if they might have the answers for me. I don't know when she's coming back, but I hope it will be very soon, because it's not fun not having her here with us. None of us know, dear, do we? My Aunt Teresa interceded. Your mother's got lots of problems to sort out, Ruth. But when she's got her life together, I'm quite sure she will return home very, very soon. Where did she say she was going? Asked the Reverend Mother, eyeing my aunt curiously. Oh, I honestly don't know, She did mention Ohio, I think, but I can't be sure. My memory's rather vague on that. But you know, Phoebe, she could have changed her mind at the last minute, moved somewhere else for a while. But I'm sure she'll turn up sooner or later. So there we are. That's the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.